They left. Not with anger, not with accident, just silence. Wet here, Mom, that's all they said. So I waited 3 hours, 5, 8, nobody came back. The cookies on my lap had gone soft. Like promises left out too long. My cardigan still smelled like home. But I didn't. I wasn't part of the trip. I was the layover, the afterthought. The woman you trust to sit still. I looked around. Chairs, voices. Families with hands full of each other. Mine were empty and trembling. Inside my old cloth bag was a notebook. Faded names long forgotten. Except one, Nola, Farmington, Missouri. That name didn't flinch. So I stood, not to chase anyone. Just to leave before they noticed I was still there. If you were quietly erased, would you wait to be written back in? Share your story. And where you're listening from. The apartment Dale found for me had no windows in the bedroom. Just one square of frosted glass in the hallway. It made it hard to tell the time. Sometimes I would wake at 3 a.m., sure it was morning, boil water, and then sit in silence while it cooled. I had one cabinet in the kitchen, a drawer for my things, and a shelf in the fridge that always smelled faintly of onions. They said it was temporary. That was 2 years ago. I had sold my house in Nevada with little fuss, packed up 4 years of living into 9 boxes. Gave away the piano. Left the garden behind. I didn't cry when the real estate agent handed me the check. I cried when I saw the daffodils bloom without me that spring. I did it to be closer to Dale. He'd just been promoted. The girls were starting school. His wife had migraines and didn't drive. It'll be easier with you nearby, he said. So I came. I thought I would be part of something again, even just the background, setting the table, folding little socks, maybe reading bedtime stories like I used to do with Dale. But their life ran on speed. Everything was scheduled, optimized, efficient. Except me. I wasn't part of any calendar invite. Sometimes I'd hear them leave in a flurry. Keys, shoes, voices overlapping, and then quiet. No one called out, "Do you want to come?" They'd just go. The front door had a particular click when it shut. I began to recognize that sound more than their footsteps. So I made routines of my own. Dusting the same bookshelf every Tuesday. Folding dish towels no one used. Washing the tea kettle even when it was already clean. I started writing in the margins of old receipts. Little thoughts, memories, recipes I remembered too late. I kept them in my cloth bag, the one with embroidery fading at the corners. My mother gave it to me when I turned 20. She said, "A woman always needs something that's hers." At night, I would hold it like a pillow, not for comfort, but to remember who I used to be. Once, I taught music at a center for children with disabilities. Every Friday, we'd gather in a circle and hum the same note. Their faces would light up, eyes closed, feeling sound in their chests. That was a long time ago. Now, I lived by the sound of the upstairs neighbor's heels and the creak of the hallway floor when Dale walked past my door without knocking. Sometimes, I pretended to be asleep when I heard him. It felt easier that way. I stopped setting the table for 4. I stopped asking if they needed anything from the store, and I stopped baking. Not because I didn't want to, because no one noticed when I did. The kitchen was too modern anyway. Everything was silent. Drawers that closed without a sound, faucets that didn't drip. Even the refrigerator hummed like it was trying not to wake anyone. I used to love kitchens. Mine in Nevada had yellow curtains and a chipped tile behind the sink that looked like a tulip if you squinted. I would play Patsy Cline on the old radio and sing while the bread rose in the warmth of the oven light. There was always music, even when I was alone. Now, I boiled water for tea and forgot I had. I reheated it, once, twice, then poured it out altogether. The mug I brought with me had a faded picture of Dale at age 5, smiling, missing 2 front teeth. He didn't remember where it came from. "It's kind of old, Mom," he said once, reaching for a clean glass instead. He wasn't unkind, he was distracted. That's worse in some ways. At least cruelty notices you. Distraction makes you invisible. I tried to write letters to old friends, but I didn't have their new addresses. Or maybe they didn't want mine. One evening, I walked to the community park a few blocks away. I sat on a bench near the swings and watched a boy push his little sister in slow circles. Their mother sat behind them, looking at her phone. The girl laughed every time she spun. Her laugh reminded me of Dale, before things had weight, before school, before jobs, before silence. I held my cloth bag tighter. Inside was a stack of notes I had never read aloud, not even to myself. My words had started to feel like leftovers, things once warm, now forgotten in the back of someone else's fridge, so I stopped writing too. The quiet grew comfortable, predictable, like the frost on my bedroom window, like the second, hand ticking of a life paused in someone else's hallway. But sometimes, even silence gets heavy, and one morning, it pressed against me so tightly, I thought I might disappear into it completely. I sat at the edge of my bed, wrapped in that old cardigan with a frayed cuff, and listened to the world continue without me. It didn't scream. It didn't slam a door. It just moved on. I used to mark days, with little stars in my calendar, birthdays, anniversaries, the first snow. Now I mark time by the sound of the recycling truck, by how many spoons were left in the drying rack, by how long it took for the tea stain to spread in the sink. No one was unkind to me. No one shouted. But no one asked how I was sleeping. No one remembered that I used to sing in choirs. No one said, "I missed you today, Mom." They were busy. Busy is what the world becomes when you don't matter anymore. I watched Dale carry himself with pride. Tall, quick, well-dressed. He was the kind of man people thanked in emails, the kind of father who showed up to school events with a firm handshake. But I wasn't part of that picture. When he introduced me, it was always, "This is my mom, Lorraine. She just moved here. Always just moved, just visiting, just helping out. Never, she raised me. Never. She taught me everything I know about patience." It was like my story had ended, and I was only walking through the credits. One evening, I stood outside their door, holding a bowl of soup I had made from scratch. Split pea. Dale's favorite when he was little. I waited for the right moment to knock. I could hear laughter inside. Voices, music, the clink of glasses. Then someone said, "I'm so glad it's just us tonight," and I couldn't move. The bowl trembled in my hands. I didn't knock. I didn't go in. I stepped back, walked down the hallway, and poured the soup into the sink in my kitchenette. The green swirled into the drain like paint. I washed the bowl carefully, dried it, put it back. Then I sat in the chair, by the window with my notebook in my lap. I wrote down the words I hadn't said. I'm still here. I still remember the songs you loved. I still have something to give. And then I closed the book. I didn't need anyone to read it. Not yet. I just needed to hear it in my own voice again. Even if it was quiet. Even if no one else was listening. Because there is a kind of strength in saying the truth to yourself while the world talks over you. The apartment Dale found for me had no windows in the bedroom. Just one square of frosted glass in the hallway. It made it hard to tell the time. Sometimes I would wake at 3 a.m., sure it was morning, boil water, and then sit in silence while it cooled. I had one cabinet in the kitchen, a drawer for my things, and a shelf in the fridge that always smelled faintly of onions. They said it was temporary. That was 2 years ago. I had sold my house in Nevada with little fuss, packed up 4 years of living into 9 boxes. Gave away the piano, left the garden behind. I didn't cry when the real estate agent handed me the check. I cried when I saw the daffodils bloom without me that spring. I did it to be closer to Dale. He'd just been promoted. The girls were starting school. His wife had migraines and didn't drive. "It'll be easier with you nearby," he said. So I came. I thought I would be part of something again, even just the background, setting the table, folding little socks. Maybe reading bedtime stories like I used to do with Dale. But their life ran on speed. Everything was scheduled, optimized, efficient. Except me. I wasn't part of any calendar invite. Sometimes I'd hear them leave in a flurry. Keys, shoes, voices overlapping, and then quiet. No one called out, "Do you want to come?" They'd just go. I started writing in the margins of old receipts. Little thoughts, memories, recipes I remembered too late. I kept them in my cloth bag. The one with embroidery fading at the corners. My mother gave it to me when I turned 20. She said, "A woman always needs something that's hers." At night, I would hold it like a pillow. Not for comfort, but to remember who I used to be. Once, I taught music at a center for children with disabilities. Every Friday, we'd gather in a circle and hum the same note. Their faces would light up, eyes closed, feeling sound in their chests. That was a long time ago. Now, I lived by the sound of the upstairs neighbor's heels and the creak of the hallway floor when Dale walked past my door without knocking. Sometimes, I pretended to be asleep when I heard him. It felt easier that way. I stopped setting the table for 4. I stopped asking if they needed anything from the store, and I stopped baking. Not because I didn't want to. Because no one noticed when I did. The kitchen was too modern anyway. Everything was silent. Drawers that closed without a sound, faucets that didn't drip. Even the refrigerator hummed like it was trying not to wake anyone. I used to love kitchens. Mine in Nevada had yellow curtains and a chipped tile behind the sink that looked like a tulip if you squinted. The stove clicked before it lit. The radio was always tuned just slightly wrong. And still, I sang. I sang over dough rising, over soup simmering, over the sound of a life I had built with my own hands. There was always music, even when I was alone. Now, I boiled water for tea and forgot I had. I reheated it, once, twice, then poured it out altogether. The mug I brought with me had a faded picture of Dale at age 5. Smiling, missing 2 front teeth. He didn't remember where it came from. "It's kind of old, Mom," he said once, reaching for a clean glass instead. He wasn't unkind, he was efficient. He managed his time well. He managed his career well. He managed me quietly. That's worse in some ways. At least cruelty has sound. Distraction is a silence with edges. It cuts softer, but it still cuts. I tried to write letters to old friends, but I didn't have their new addresses. Or maybe they didn't want mine. I kept rewriting the openings. "Do you remember the peach cobbler we ruined? Do you still live on that street with the wild roses? Is anyone still listening?" And then I stopped writing altogether. One evening, I walked to the community park a few blocks away. I sat on a bench near the swings and watched a boy push his little sister in slow circles. Their mother sat behind them, looking at her phone. The girl laughed every time she spun. Her laugh reminded me of Dale, before things had weight, before school, before careers, before silence. I held my cloth bag tighter. Inside was a stack of notes I had never read aloud, not even to myself. My words had started to feel like leftovers, things once warm, now forgotten in the back of someone else's fridge. So I tucked them away. Between fabric and memory, the quiet grew comfortable. Predictable, like the frost on my bedroom window, like the faint buzz of lights left on in a room no one enters anymore. I used to mark days, with little stars in my calendar, birthdays, anniversaries, the first snow. Now I mark time by the sound of the recycling truck, by how many spoons were left in the drying rack, by how long it took for the tea stain to spread in the sink. No one was unkind to me. No one shouted. But no one asked how I was sleeping. No one remembered that I used to sing in choirs. No one said, "I missed you today, Mom." They were busy. Busy is what the world becomes when you no longer belong in its plans. I watched Dale carry himself with pride, tall, quick, well-dressed. He was the kind of man people thanked in emails. The kind of father who showed up to school events with a firm handshake. But I wasn't part of that picture. When he introduced me, it was always, "This is my mom, Lorraine. She just moved here." Always just moved, just helping, just staying for a bit. Never. She taught me how to be patient. Never. She used to hum lullabies when I couldn't sleep. It felt like my story had ended, and now I was only walking across someone else's epilogue. One evening, I stood outside their apartment door, holding a bowl of soup I had made from scratch. Split pea, Dale's favorite when he was little. I waited for the right moment to knock. Inside, Laughter, voices, the clink of glass. Then someone said, "I'm so glad it's just us tonight." My hands went cold. I stepped back, not in anger, just understanding. I walked down the hallway, into my kitchenette, and poured the soup down the drain. The green swirled into the basin like watercolor, like memory being washed away. I washed the bowl slowly, dried it, put it away. Then I sat by the window, the sky turning a bruised shade of blue. I opened my notebook, not to write something new, but to remind myself I still had something to say. I wrote, in my own hand, "I'm still here. I still remember the songs you loved. I still have something to give." And then I closed the book. I didn't need an audience. I didn't need applause. I just needed to hear my own voice before it disappeared completely. Even if it was quiet, even if no one else was listening. Because sometimes the most radical act a woman can do is to believe she still matters in a world that forgot to ask. The first time I noticed I'd been left out, it wasn't loud. It was quiet, almost polite. The invitation came in the mail. A cream envelope with gold print and a picture of balloons on the front. I smiled when I saw the return address. It was from Cora, Dale's wife. A birthday party for Eliza, my granddaughter, her 8th. I had already started knitting something weeks ago, a small cardigan with lilac buttons. The softest yarn I could afford. I imagined how it would fit her. How her eyes might widen at the color, how she'd twirl with it buttoned up tight. I called Dale to ask what time I should arrive. There was a pause. Then he said, "Oh, didn't Cora mention it?" "Mention what?" "It's more of a kid's only thing this year. Supervised at one of those trampoline places." He laughed a little. "Honestly, Mom, you wouldn't enjoy it. Loud music, chaotic." I waited. He didn't add anything. No offer to pick me up. No suggestion I come early, just to see her. No, she'll be sad not to see you. Just silence. So I said, "Of course. That makes sense." I hung up before my voice could betray me, and then I folded the lilac sweater, placed it in a gift bag, taped the card shut with a sticker of a butterfly. I left it by their door the next morning. No one opened when I knocked, so I just slid it inside the screen. Later that day I heard them come home. Heard laughter, footsteps, a flurry of paper bags and the clatter of shoes, but no knock on my door. No, "Thank you for the sweater." No, "She loved it." No evidence it was ever unwrapped. The next week, a photo went up on Cora's Facebook page. All the kids bouncing under neon lights, everyone in bright colors. Eliza in a yellow tutu, her face painted like a tiger. Dale was in the background, smiling with a party horn in his mouth. And in the caption, "Best birthday ever." Just us, just the way it should be. I reread that line twice. Just us, just the way it should be. I sat with that sentence longer than I care to admit. Not angry, not even hurt exactly, just hollowed out. Like someone had reached in and quietly taken something I hadn't realized I still carried. That was when I stopped waiting for invitations and started noticing all the rooms I was no longer welcome in. A few weeks later, there was a school play. Eliza was in it, her first speaking role. She played a baby bird. I found out by accident. A neighbor mentioned it in the elevator, smiling as she showed me a blurry photo on her phone. "There's your granddaughter. Adorable up there on that stage." I smiled back, though I hadn't known there was a stage, or a date, or that she had been practicing lines for weeks. I waited until I got home to sit down. My legs felt heavier than usual. I opened my notebook, ready to write something, anything. But the page stayed blank. What would I say? "I used to iron your father's costumes with lavender water." I used to clap so loudly. The ushers winced. None of it seemed to belong anymore. Later that week, I asked Dale how it went. He shrugged. "It was cute, just a school thing." Just again, that word always tasted like tin. He showed me a video on his phone. Eliza flapping her arms, chirping her lines. She looked proud. I smiled as I watched, and something inside me ached. Not because I missed the show, but because I hadn't even been missed. There was no empty seat, no mention, no glance toward the back of the room in case I had arrived late. No thought that I might have wanted to be there at all. After he left, I opened a box in my closet. Inside were photographs. Old programs from Dale's childhood recitals. Tiny scraps of applause folded into brittle pages. I held one program up to the light. Peter Pan, starring Dale Temple, age 7. My handwriting in the corner, front row. Row B, center seat. I remembered the green tights that sagged around his knees. The paper sword I helped him paint silver. The way he scanned the audience for me before saying his first line. I had kept everything. Not because it was perfect, because it mattered. Now, I was being stored away too. Not in boxes, but in a mission. Not with cruelty, with a soft kind of absence. The kind that doesn't bruise, but erases. Slowly, quietly, without the courtesy of goodbye. I stood by the window for a long time that night, watching the street lamp flicker over the sidewalk below. People came and went, some laughing, some lost in thought. And I realized I had become like that flicker. Still there, still burning, but no longer lighting anyone's way. It didn't stop at birthdays and school plays. There were dinners I wasn't told about. Trips I found out from photos. Even the Christmas tree was decorated without me that year. I had bought 3 new ornaments, tiny ceramic bells, hand-painted with gold. I thought Eliza might like to hang them. Just something small, just a moment together. But by the time I came upstairs, the living room was already aglow. Lights strung, stockings hung, music playing from some Bluetooth speaker. I stood in the doorway, holding the little box in both hands. No one noticed. Dale looked up. "Oh, hi, Mom. We weren't sure if you were home." I nodded. "I brought some ornaments." Cora smiled politely. "We actually went with a color scheme this year. Gold and silver only." I looked down. The bells in my hand were cream and blue. "Maybe next year," I said softly. She nodded and turned away, so I went back downstairs. I didn't cry. I didn't slam any doors. I just placed the box on my shelf. The bells stayed there, still wrapped in tissue, still waiting for hands that wouldn't reach. A few days later, I heard them laughing, talking about a ski trip planned for the girls' winter break. I hadn't known. I wouldn't have gone. But I would have liked to be asked, even just once. I wanted to say, "Don't you remember how I used to pack the lunches? How I used to tape hand warmers to Dale's gloves when he was small? How I stood at the bottom of the hill, cheering for every wobble like it was gold?" But I said nothing. Because there's a kind of silence you grow used to. A silence that doesn't come from the lack of sound, but from the absence of invitation. It wraps around you like a coat no one else notices. Heavy, but familiar. I started eating dinner earlier, before they got home, so I wouldn't have to hear them ask each other what they were hungry for while passing by my door without stopping. I turned off the upstairs lights more often. They didn't need to see the flicker under my door. It felt better not to remind them there was still someone listening. Still someone waiting for the sound of inclusion, even if it never came. And as December wore on, and the bells stayed tucked in their box, I began to understand. I was no longer forgotten. I was simply omitted. On purpose. And that made all the difference. It started with a piece of mail I almost didn't open. A plain envelope. No return address. The kind you toss without reading. But something about it, maybe the way my name was typed, not handwritten, made me pause. The paper inside felt too thick for junk. Too official. Account ownership confirmation. It listed the joint savings account Dale had helped me set up when I moved. And next to the line for primary holder was his name, not mine. Mine appeared lower, secondary access. No authority to withdraw without consent. I read it again, then again. The date of the change was June, 3 months ago. I sat still for a long time. The kettle behind me boiled and cooled. I never poured the water. I remembered the day we went to the bank. I had worn my navy cardigan, the one with the loose button. The banker smiled too much. The screen faced away from me. Dale filled out most of the paperwork. "It's just so I can help if you need anything," he said. "You know how banks are. Complicated for older clients." Older. The word hadn't bothered me then. It bothered me now. I had signed where they pointed. I remember the smell of the pen. Dry ink and cheap plastic. I didn't think I was giving anything away. I thought I was being taken care of. Isn't that what they always say? It's for your own good. I called the bank. A woman with a careful voice confirmed everything. Yes, Mrs. Temple. Mr. Dale Temple has been designated as sole financial authority on this account. Her voice was too kind. Like she'd said this before, like I wasn't the first mother to wake up erased. I thanked her. Hung up, sat at the table. My checkbook was in the same tin it had always been, labeled neatly in my own handwriting, Lorraine household. I opened it. The pen I'd used for years was still there. Blue ink. Faded. I ran my fingers down the columns. All the numbers were mine. Groceries. Laundry soap. School clothes for Dale. Doctor visits. Birthday gifts. Heating oil. No one helped me write those numbers. No one helped me manage when we had little. Now, with more than I ever had before, I had nothing. Not even the right to touch it. And I hadn't even noticed when he turned the lock. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the lights off, the ceiling flickering from the street lamp outside. Every sound felt louder. The click of the fridge. The distant hum of the heater. Even the silence had a weight to it. I kept thinking about signatures. How easy it is to give something away when the room is quiet and the people you love are smiling. I remembered my first bank account. I was 17. My father drove me in his old Dodge, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper on the seat between us. He stood beside me while I signed. Didn't say much, but he let me feel the weight of the pen. "That's your name," he said. "Once it's on paper, it means something." His voice wasn't stern, it was steady. I had forgotten what that kind of steadiness felt like. He had rough hands, but he never touched the money I earned. Never asked. Never needed to. It wasn't about the money. It was about the name. The respect behind it. I wonder what he would think now. His daughter, asking for permission to touch what she saved. To touch her own name. The next morning, I made coffee but didn't drink it. I just sat at the table, watching the steam rise and vanish like breath in winter. I tried to remember the last time Dale had asked if I was okay. Not out of obligation. Out of noticing. I couldn't recall it. Not one moment. I checked the account online. He had moved money. Transferred a large portion into a family trust I didn't recognize. My name wasn't listed. There were scheduled payments for things I'd never agreed to, consulting fees. Tax restructuring. Retainer services. Each line item looked professional, intentional. No mess. No lies. Just a mission. He didn't need my signature anymore. He hadn't for months. I wondered how long he'd been planning it. Before I moved. Before I sold the house. Before he smiled at me across the bank table and said, "Just formalities, Mum." I closed the laptop. My hands felt cold. Not from the room. From the realization that nothing had been stolen. It had all been handed over. By me. Willingly. Lovingly. Blindly. There's a difference between being poor and being powerless. I had known poverty, but this was something else. This was being erased with a pen I had trusted him to hold. The next Sunday, I made biscuits. The kind Dale used to love, flaky, warm, brushed with honey butter. I placed 6 in a tin, lined with parchment, and walked upstairs. Their door was open. Lauder inside, music playing. I stood at the edge of the doorway, holding the tin with both hands. Cora turned. "Oh, Lorraine." "Hey!" "I didn't hear you knock." I hadn't. I stepped inside a little, just enough to see. The dining table was full. Plates, glasses, roasted chicken in the center. A friend from work. 2 of Eliza's classmates. Their parents. Dale looked up from carving. "Mom, you didn't have to come up," I smiled. I brought biscuits. Cora walked over, took the tin carefully. "That's sweet. I'm sure they'll get eaten." She placed them near the sink. Covered them with a napkin. Not on the table. Not with the food. I stood there a second longer than I should have, and then said, "Enjoy your dinner." No one stopped me. No one asked me to sit. Back downstairs, I sat on my bed and watched the ceiling breathe. The air was warm. Too warm. I took off my sweater, then put it back on. My hands were cold. Later that week, I went to the library, not to check out a book, just to sit where no one expected anything of me. I watched a woman help her elderly mother fill out a form. Gently, patiently. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't take the pen from her hand. She waited. When the woman finished signing, they both smiled. I looked away. Not because I was jealous, but because something in me broke. Softly, without sound. The kind of breaking that folds in on itself, like paper worn too many times at the same crease. That night, I pulled my bank file from the bottom drawer. Every statement, every receipt. Proof of a life built in small, exact decisions. I ran my hand over the folder like it was fabric, something stitched, something held. I made a list of what I still had under my name. It wasn't much. A pension check, a savings bond from my mother, a drawer of legal documents I still understood. But it was mine. And I held onto that page like it could steady me. Because when someone takes your name off paper, you begin to wonder if you've disappeared entirely. Not from their hearts, but from the record. And sometimes, that hurts more. I didn't plan to leave that morning. I had gone upstairs to return a casserole dish. Nothing dramatic, no packed bag, no final note. Just a glass dish with a blue lid. I had washed it carefully the night before, dried it by hand, and let it sit on the counter overnight, like something sacred. I had made baked apples last week, sent them up still warm, thinking it might soften the chill in the air between us. No one had said anything. No empty dish returned, no thank you. Just silence. Still, I brought the dish back. A small part of me hoped Cora might say something, anything. "Oh, just leave it on the bench, Lorraine," she said. Her eyes didn't lift from her phone. She didn't invite me in. Didn't ask how I was. Didn't even glance at the dish. So I placed it on the bench, nodded, and turned to go. Halfway down the stairs, I paused. Not because I wanted to stay, but because I realized I had nothing to return to. No one was waiting for me. No tasks left undone. No sound in the rooms below, but the ticking of my wall clock, counting down nothing. I sat on the edge of my bed, still holding my keys. The room looked smaller than usual, or maybe I had grown out of it. There was a photo of Dale on the dresser, age 10, holding a fishing pole, grinning through 2 missing teeth. His arms were thin, his shoes too big. He had been so sure of himself. I used to think that version of him still lived somewhere inside the man upstairs. But now, I wasn't sure. I turned the photo face down. And for the first time since I moved to Arizona, I felt the full weight of being unnecessary. Not rejected. Not insulted. Just no longer needed. I opened the closet, pulled down the suitcase I had brought from Nevada. It still smelled faintly of lemon furniture polish. I placed it on the bed, unzipped it, and then just stood there. I wasn't packing. I wasn't running. I just needed to prove to myself that I could still leave if I chose to. That I hadn't been tethered here by guilt and convenience. That somewhere inside me still lived the woman who once boarded a Greyhound with a newborn and 47 because she believed in better. That evening, I made tea. Sat in the kitchen. Didn't turn on any lights. The dark felt easier than answering questions I couldn't voice. Around 8 p.m., I heard laughter through the ceiling. They were watching something upstairs. A comedy, maybe, or just life. I sipped my tea in the dark, and for one strange moment, I didn't feel invisible, because no one was looking, and that absence, it was so complete, so uninterrupted, that it almost felt like freedom. The next morning, I woke early. The air felt thinner somehow, like something had already been decided in my sleep. I boiled water, toasted 1 slice of bread, ate it slowly, without butter. Then I walked to the small post office 2 blocks away. I hadn't been there in months. There was a faint smell of paper and dust. Comforting in a way I didn't expect. I asked the clerk for a change of address form. She handed it over without looking up. "Moving far?" she asked, eyes still on her screen. "I'm not sure yet," I said, "but I want to be ready." She looked up at that, just for a second. Back home, I placed the form on my table, not signed. Just waiting. I filled it out in pencil, Missouri. That was where my Aunt Nola used to live. I didn't know if she was still alive, but the town name felt solid in my mouth. Farmington. I whispered it like a spell. A soft promise I hadn't earned yet. After lunch, I opened the drawer where I kept my mother's letters. They were yellowed at the corners, creased from rereading. Inside one envelope was a recipe card. Her handwriting, slanted and sweet. Custard pie, for when someone needs reminding they're loved. I ran my finger over the ink. Felt the softness of memory pushing back. I had baked that pie for Dale once, after his first breakup. He didn't cry in front of me, but he ate 3 slices without speaking. I washed that pie plate 3 times that night, as if I could hold something together by rinsing it enough. Later that evening, I stood at the closet again. Not to pack, not yet, but to see what still fit, what still belonged to the woman I might become next. I pulled out a soft green blouse I hadn't worn in years. The tag was faded, the hem slightly loose. I held it up to my shoulders and looked at my reflection. Not in a mirror, in the glass of the window, the one that faced east, where the light came in quiet and clean. I placed 3 things on the bed: the blouse, a cloth bag, and my notebook. None of them valuable, but all of them mine. I sat there until the room went dark. Lights came on upstairs again. The murmur of dinner, plates, voices. But I didn't listen hard. I didn't lean toward the noise. I listened inward, to the stillness. And in that quiet, I felt something shift. Not loud, not fierce, but certain, like a thread being tugged gently from beneath the surface. I didn't know where I would go, or when. But I knew this whatever came next would begin with a choice. One made in silence. One stitched from my own hands, and signed in my name. I didn't decide to begin again. It began without me. A week after the change, of address form sat untouched on my table. I took the long way home from the library. It was cold that day. The kind of cold that sits on your shoulders, makes you walk slower, as if the air itself wants you to pause. I passed a thrift shop I'd never noticed before. Its sign was chipped, the window fogged with dust, but something inside made me stop. A sewing machine, not new, not polished, just sitting there quietly in the corner, beneath a faded curtain panel. I stepped closer, pressed my hand to the glass. It looked almost exactly like the one my mother used. The same hand crank, the same gold script along the black base, half worn away. Even the way it tilted slightly to one side, like it had stories leaning on it. It wasn't for sale. There wasn't even a price tag, but it held something. Memory, weight, rhythm. When I opened the door, a bell above it chimed. Small, metallic, honest. Inside, the shop smelled like linen and cedar and old stories. Stacks of folded fabric rose like towers along the back wall. Thread in every color hummed softly from a rack near the counter. There was no music playing. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of presence. Behind the register stood a woman, in an apron streaked with chalk and thread. Hair swept into a clip. Eyes clear but not rushed. She looked at me like she already knew what I needed. "She still runs," she said, nodding toward the machine. "Does anyone use her?" I asked. "No," she said. 3 years. No one's ever even asked." "I'm not sure why I stopped," I said. She didn't smile, but she softened. "Sometimes your hands remember before your mind catches up." I didn't buy the machine. Not that day. But I came back the next. And the day after that. Not to purchase, just to fold fabric. To run my fingers over cotton and muslin and denim. To touch something that still responded to softness. Her name was Betty. She had run the shop for 12 years. Divorced. 2 grown sons. One lived in Maine, the other never called. We didn't talk much that week. She handed me a square of muslin one afternoon. "Try something," she said. A needle already threaded lay beside it. My fingers trembled. The needle felt thinner than memory, but slowly they remembered. The rhythm came back before the confidence did, stitch by stitch, loop by loop, no plan, no pattern, just movement, and in the movement, a kind of return. My hands began again, and somewhere, quietly, so did I. By the end of the 2nd week, Betty offered me a stool behind the counter. She didn't say it like a favor. just nudged it forward with her foot and said, "Might as well be useful." I didn't sit right away. I watched her take apart a hem someone had sewn too tight. She used a seam ripper like a paintbrush. Carefully, deliberately, without anger. She worked slow, not because she had to, but because she believed in letting things breathe. "People think sewing is about fixing," she said. "But mostly, it's about listening." I didn't answer. But something in me softened. The needle in my hand no longer felt foreign. It had rhythm now, warmth, like a memory returning through my fingertips. By Friday, I was helping sort fabric. Betty handed me a stack of old linens. "Make sense of this," she said. So I did, first by color, then by weight, then, almost instinctively, by story. The blue one with daisies reminded me of the kitchen curtains in Nevada. The olive cotton had the same softness as Dale's baby blanket. There was a pale pink square that smelled faintly of talcum powder. I pressed it to my face without thinking. Something in my chest stirred, like grief, but gentler. Not the sharp kind that knocks you down. The kind that whispers, "You're still here." I began coming early, leaving later. Betty never asked why, and I never explained. There was comfort in the space between words, in the scrape of scissors, the pull of thread, the hush of two women mending things, not just with their hands, but with memory. Sometimes a customer would come in with a torn apron, a pillowcase with faded embroidery, a piece of fabric passed down through too many hands. Betty would glance at me, then nod toward the counter. "You've got small stitches," she said one afternoon, like someone who remembers where things fall apart. That night I stayed after closing. The shop dimmed to shadows. The silence stretched, soft as muslin. I sat beneath the lamp, a mug of tea growing cold beside me, my needle catching the light with every pass. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was wasting daylight. I wasn't killing time. I was saving something. Thread by thread, line by line, quiet as hope. One morning, Betty asked if I could open the shop for her. "Just for an hour," she said. "Dentist appointment." I said yes before thinking. She handed me the key without hesitation. It sat in my palm, cool and unfamiliar. I hadn't held a key to anything since I moved in under Dale's roof. Everything had been coded, electronic, or already unlocked. But this was brass, worn smooth from years of turning. When I walked up to the shop that morning, the sun hadn't quite settled in. The window caught the early light like a breath on glass. I turned the lock, felt it give, and something shifted inside me. The bell above the door rang like always. I flipped the sign to open, breathed in the familiar scent of fabric and dust. No music, no voices, just the quiet of a space waiting to be used. For the first 10 minutes, no one came in. I didn't mind. I dusted the shelves, straightened the scissors, ran my hand along the counter like it might remember me. There was dignity in small order. Then the door opened. An older woman stepped in, perched slightly, her steps careful, like her memories lived in her knees. She held a canvas bag close to her chest. From it, she pulled a patchwork quilt, faded, torn in places, but folded with reverence. "My mother made this," she said, "in 1952. It needs help." I nodded, gently unfolded it. The fabric was soft as old pages. Along the edge, tiny initials stitched in pale thread LJT. I ran my finger across the letters. The thread felt fragile, but certain. "Some things are worth keeping," I said. She smiled. Not wide, not quick. Just enough to say she knew. She left the quilt with me. I placed it gently in the mending basket, between a torn pillowcase and a hem that had come loose from time. Betty returned an hour later, holding a coffee cup and a folded receipt. She looked at the counter, at the light still pouring through the window. Then at me. "You handled it," she said. "No question, no checking. Just faith, handed like fabric." I stood a little straighter that afternoon. Not because I'd done something big, but because I'd done something alone, unsupervised, unprompted, and quietly right. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's hour. I belonged to the day. I belonged to the space. And I belonged to the version of me who could be trusted with small, precious things. and maybe even with starting over. It began with a letter I didn't expect. The envelope was pale yellow, the kind used for sympathy cards. But the handwriting was familiar, curved, soft, pressed just enough to be remembered. I opened it slowly, already bracing for news. But it wasn't a condolence. It was from Ruthie. We hadn't spoken in years. She was an old friend from Nevada. We used to trade tea blends and stories about difficult daughters. She'd moved to Kansas to live with her eldest after a bad fall in the shower. I thought of her often, never called. Inside the envelope was a short note, no more than 10 lines. Lorraine, it read, I found this in an old recipe tin. Your handwriting. Do you remember? Folded inside the letter was a sheet of lined paper, yellowed at the edges. My own cursive ran down the page. A list, names, addresses, cities, and scribbled beside them, had the best lemon pie. Lost her husband in '94, still sings in the choir. Used to hem everything by hand. Tiny stitches. I read it once, then again, and suddenly I could see their faces. Ethel with her bangles that clinked when she laughed. Joanie, who could match thread color by memory. Miss Myrtle, who wore lavender every single Tuesday. They weren't just names. They were women I had worked beside. At the community center for 17 years, we used to call it the table. Not just a place to sit, a place to matter. We shared patterns and prayer requests, leftovers and laments. No one was turned away. No one had to explain their sadness. It was a space built not of bricks, but of presence. I hadn't thought about that room in so long. But holding that list in my hand, their names felt like seeds, waiting, and just like that, I knew what I wanted to build. Not a house, not an escape, but a space, a quiet one. One where the past could sit beside the present without shame. Where women could come not to fix, but to rest their hands on fabric and say, this was mine once. I didn't know how yet. But I knew this, I wouldn't wait to be asked. I wouldn't wait to be invited back to a table that no longer had a seat for me. This time, I would build the table. One stitch at a time. I didn't tell Betty right away, but something in me had shifted. I started staying after hours more often, not to sew, to sketch, on scraps of receipt paper, on the backs of Betty's used pattern books, even on napkins from the diner across the street. I drew tables, not fancy ones, no polish, no carvings, just wide, sturdy tables with mismatched chairs, chairs with arms worn smooth, seats that creaked like they remembered stories. I imagined the room that might hold them. Soft lamps in the corners, shelves of thread in every color, none of them labeled. A place where a woman could sit down without having to explain why. No sign in sheets. No waivers. No obligations. Just, come in. Bring what's broken. Or bring nothing at all. There would be baskets of fabric from old homes, and a kettle that never quite ran dry. A tin of buttons. A jar of old seam rippers. A drawer full of stories folded into handkerchiefs. I didn't say it aloud, but it lived inside me now. Clearer each day. Betty noticed. She always noticed. Your hands twitch when you dream, she said one night, not unkindly. I smiled, said nothing. Then one Thursday afternoon, she placed a folded index card on the counter. I've been renting the back storage room from the church next door, she said. Used to hold tables for events. Now it's mostly dust. I unfolded the card. Inside was a tiny map, drawn in pencil, 3 doors, 2 windows, 1 low beam across the ceiling. You'll need permission, she said. And time. I stared at the sketch. Felt something rise in my throat, old and warm. I don't have money, I said quietly. Betty shrugged. You've got thread, and time, and a story. She paused. Looked straight at me. Sometimes, that's all you need to build something worth sitting in. I didn't answer. But that night, I went home and opened the cedar box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were scraps of cloth from every part of my life. Dale's old school shirt. My wedding veil, yellowed but intact. A napkin embroidered with my mother's initials. I didn't cry. I unfolded them one by one, touched each corner, felt the thread rise like memory through my skin. And then, slowly, I began to sort. Not by color, but by story. And that was where I would begin. It started with one table. Betty helped me carry it in through the side door. It wasn't beautiful. One leg was shorter than the others, so we folded a scrap of denim beneath it, pressed flat from too many years of use. But it stood. We added 2 chairs. Mismatched. One had a crack in the backrest. The other had arms that creaked when you leaned in. I brought a cushion from home, faded blue, stuffed with cotton that had thinned over time. Betty plugged in a small lamp with a yellow shade. It clicked softly when it turned on. The light pooled on the table like warmth. She handed me a tin filled with loose buttons, a wooden box of needles she hadn't touched in years. I added my own pieces. My mother's red pincushion, shaped like a strawberry. A pair of shears still sharp enough to scare me. A thermos with chipped enamel, still kept tea warm for hours. I swept the floor 3 times. Not because it was dirty, but because it felt like a ritual. Like I was preparing a space not for business, but for return. I ironed a square of fabric, a soft linen printed with small blue violets, and laid it in the center of the table. No sign, no banner, just that fabric, like a quiet declaration. This space remembers you. For 3 days no one came. I didn't mind. I stitched. I wrote. I sorted thread by color and sound. Then, on the 4th morning, the door creaked open. A woman stood at the threshold. Thin, gray curls tucked into a scarf. She held a plastic bag clutched tight in both hands. She looked around, then pointed at the chair across from mine. "May I?" I nodded. She sat, unwrapped the bag. Inside was a half-finished quilt block. The fabric had softened at the edges, as if time had tried to erase it, but failed. "Been in a drawer since '88, she said. "Figured it was time." She didn't cry. She didn't explain. She pulled a needle from her coat pocket, threaded it without pause, and began to stitch. Her hands were slow, but sure. I didn't hover, didn't ask questions. I just sat across from her and stitched in rhythm. 2 women, 1 table. No introductions, no pasts exchanged, only presence, only thread moving through fabric. And for the first time since leaving Dale's home, I felt like I wasn't starting over alone. That's how it began. Not with a mission, not with a sign, but with one woman walking in and sitting down. It was a Saturday afternoon when Dale showed up at the shop. He didn't knock. He just walked in, like he still had permission to enter my life without asking. The door creaked. The bell chimed. But it wasn't the gentle sound it had always been. This time, it felt sharp. Betty was out running errands. Elaine was stitching near the window. I was folding scraps by the back wall, sorting by fabric weight and memory. When I turned, Dale was already halfway across the room. He looked out of place. Pressed shirt, shined shoes. A man walking into something he hadn't earned. His eyes scanned the walls, the shelves, the long table. His face didn't register the space, only the oddness of me being in it. "What is this place?" he asked. The tone was half joke, half instruction. I didn't answer right away. I pointed gently to the tin of buttons on the center table. "Choose one," I said. He frowned. "What? If you're going to sit?" I said. "Choose a button. Everyone brings something to the table." He blinked, looked down, then back at me. "Mom, come on. Can we talk?" The softness in his voice was too smooth, too practiced. I knew that voice. It was the same one he used with the notary, with the bank officer who processed the transfers, with the woman who called to confirm I was of sound capacity before removing my name. Elaine quietly stood. She gathered her fabric, nodded once at me, then stepped outside, her silence deliberate, respectful. Dale sighed, ran a hand through his hair, just like he used to in college when he'd been caught in a lie. "Look," he said, "I need to explain some things. About the account, about what Cora and I were trying to do." I stayed still. My hands rested on fabric, but my voice, for once, stayed where it belonged. Inside power. I didn't ask why. Didn't lean in to make it easier for him. Let the silence do the work. Let the room remind him that I no longer lived in his decisions, that he was standing in a space I had built without his permission, without his blessing, and without his name. And that was the beginning of the end. He sat down across from me. Didn't touch a button. Didn't meet my eyes. The chair creaked beneath his weight, but the silence creaked louder. I didn't think it would go this far, he said quietly. I didn't answer. He looked around, then back at his hands. We just wanted to simplify things. Make sure everything was in order. I nodded. Not in agreement, but in understanding. I had heard this tone before. From doctors explaining procedures without asking. From men who called me Mom, but never said my name. We thought we'd manage your accounts, maybe set up a trust. You already did, I said. My voice surprised even me. It was level, calm, like something polished by time. He flinched. Cora said it was better this way. Cleaner, easier. You wouldn't have to worry. I wasn't worried, I said. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Silence filled the table. The good kind. The kind that doesn't rush to be filled. I didn't think you'd find out so soon, he muttered. That made me smile. Not bitter. Just tired. You think I didn't notice when my bank card stopped? He looked, working. He looked down. I was going to tell you. When? More silence. I leaned back, let the room speak for me. The sewing machine in the corner let out a soft click. Betty must have left the wheel turned. I imagined her outside, pretending not to wait. Dale shifted. You don't understand what it's like, he said. Trying to plan for everyone. Trying to make sure nothing falls apart. I studied his face. He looked smaller in this space. Not younger. Just unsure. He wasn't cruel. Not calculated. Just used to deciding. Used to being the one who knew what was best. And I had been used to letting him. Until now. I folded a piece of muslin in front of me. Smoothed its corners. You took my name off things, I said. Quietly. Like it wouldn't matter. He didn't deny it. I nodded. You assumed I'd go along. That I'd trust you. That I'd stay quiet. He looked up. I thought I was protecting you. From what? He didn't answer. I stared at the table between us. It was scratched, wobbly, but it held, and I realized that was enough. I didn't raise my voice, didn't cry, didn't ask why he did it. I just folded the muslin in front of me, neatly, with care, then pushed it gently toward him. This is what I do now, I said. I mend what others think is already ruined. He stared at the cloth like it might burn him. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. But you did. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. Outside, the wind stirred the awning. A leaf scraped softly along the windowsill. Inside, nothing moved. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I stood up. Walked to the corner drawer near the sewing machine. Opened it slowly. Inside were 2 folders. One with my name. One with his. I pulled out the copy of the paperwork. Documents he thought I'd never see. The trust. The asset transfer. The quiet removal of my name from everything I once built. I had found them weeks ago. Betty's niece, a paralegal, helped me file the reversals. No court battle. No shouting match. Just pages and ink. And a notarized line that returned my name. I walked back to the table. Placed the folder in front of him. I've already reversed it, I said. The power of attorney. The joint accounts. The house designation. All of it. His mouth parted slightly. How? I met his eyes. Held them? You forgot, I said. I was never helpless. Just quiet. He didn't argue. Didn't reach for the folder. He just sat there. And for the first time, I saw the boy in him. The boy who once broke my favorite vase and tried to tape it back together before I noticed. I had forgiven that boy. But the man needed to know that trust has weight. And mine had been lifted. He stood slowly. His hands hovered above the button tin. Then pulled away. He didn't take the folder. Didn't take the cloth. Didn't take anything. Just walked out the door, the bell giving one soft chime behind him. I stayed still for a while. Let the sound settle. Let the dust return to the windowsill. Let my breath catch up to the moment. Then I looked around. The walls, the thread, the old chairs. This was my space, not borrowed, not gifted, not conditional. Elaine came back a few minutes later. Didn't ask what happened. She only looked at me, then sat down across the table again. We both picked up our needles. And as the thread passed through the fabric, I exhaled, not because the battle was over, but because the silence, this time, belonged to me. The shop never got a sign. No bold letters, no hours listed, no slogan about legacy or craft. But people found it anyway. Word spread slowly, like stories passed over fences or between folding chairs at church picnics. First it was Elaine, then her sister, then a woman named Grace, who brought her daughter's old school uniform to mend. Not because the child would wear it again, but because she couldn't bear to throw it out. No one asked who I was. No one asked why the tables were mismatched or why the windows had no curtains. They just came. Some brought torn pillowcases. Others brought silence. A few brought nothing at all, except the need to sit and not explain. And in that quiet, something began to grow. I rearranged the room to hold more tables. Not too many. Just enough for everyone to hear themselves think, while listening to others breathe. One day, a woman came with a box of zippers and said, "These were my mother's." She believed in saving everything. Another left behind a bundle of yarn, tied with a ribbon that had once wrapped a birthday cake. "For when someone needs color again," she wrote. The room became a kind of memory bank. Not curated, not themed, just true. Sometimes we sat in near silence, needles moving through cloth like breath through grief. Sometimes someone would hum, and another would join in softly, as if remembering how to belong. One afternoon, I noticed a girl, no older than 12, folding fabric scraps into tiny squares with deliberate care. "What are you making?" I asked. She didn't look up. "A place for my grandmother's hands to rest," she said. I didn't ask more. That evening, I stitched slower, let the rhythm guide me. Let the breath of others shape the silence. And I thought maybe this was the real inheritance. Not money, not land, not a name in ink, but the kind of space you leave behind where women remember they still have something to give and be given. It was never about starting a movement. I didn't want to be known. I just wanted a table. One table where no one asked you to smile before you were ready. Where you could say nothing for an hour and still be seen. Where no one interrupted silence to make themselves feel useful. Some days, no one spoke. Some days, someone cried without warning, and no one rushed to fix it. We let grief sit at the table too. Let it stitch its own slow seam between the scraps and the seams. There was no need for wisdom, no tidy closure, only room. One woman came every Tuesday. Her name was Nora. She never brought thread, just ran fabric between her fingers, like she was searching for someone inside it. She didn't sew a single thing, but she always left with a softer walk. Another brought a quilt she found in her attic, stitched by a mother she never knew. "Is it worth repairing?" she asked. I touched the torn edge. "It's still holding," I said, and so was she. We didn't call it therapy, didn't call it healing. We just kept coming back, bringing what we had, offering what we could, sitting when sitting was all we had to give. There was no leader, no lesson plan, only rhythm, only presence. Only hands remembering what the mind had tried to forget, that we are never too old to begin again. That even a frayed hem can still hold warmth, that being needed, that even once a week, is sometimes the surest way to remember you still exist. And more than that you still matter. Not for what you once did, not for what you gave away, but simply because your hands are still here, and they still know how to make something whole. The table changed over time. We added cushions to the chairs, some homemade, some donated from attics that smelled of lavender and dust. One woman brought a basket of reading glasses she found at a yard sale. "So no one has to squint to feel capable," she said, placing them carefully in a tin marked, "Borrow me." Another began showing up each morning with a thermos of tea, a not fancy tea, just warm, honest brews. She never asked what anyone wanted. She simply poured and set it down beside whoever looked coldest. The shelf near the window filled slowly with notes. Not framed, not labeled, just tiny scraps of paper tucked between spools and chalk. Today was the first day I felt real again. Her laugh reminded me of my sister's. "Thank you for remembering my name," Some were signed. Most weren't. We never read them aloud, but sometimes, on hard days, I'd open one. Just to remember the room had worked, even when no one said so. Not everyone talked. Some came in quietly, stitched in the corner, folded their cloth when the clock struck noon, and disappeared. But even their silence stayed behind. A kind of residue in the air, like the warmth left in a chair after someone's gone. One afternoon, I watched two women stitch the same square. They didn't speak, didn't gesture, just passed the needle back and forth, as if the fabric itself had chosen to be held by four hands that day. It was like watching memory braid itself back together. Without apology, without narrative. I didn't interrupt, didn't ask. Some things don't need names. They just need a table that doesn't ask who you used to be. A rhythm that accepts you. Whether you come humming or hollow, and a chair that waits even when you don't know how long you'll stay. One morning in late October, a knock came at the door before I unlocked it. Soft, hesitant. I opened it, expecting Betty or maybe Grace, running early with lemon muffins or a newspaper from 2 towns over. Instead, it was a young girl, no more than 10, maybe 11. She wore a red knit hat too big for her head and held a folded piece of paper with both hands. It looked soft from too much handling. Creased corners, faint fingerprints like ghosts of worry. "Are you Lorraine?" she asked. I nodded. She extended the paper like it was something sacred. "It's from my grandma," she said. "She said you'd remember her stitches." I unfolded the note. Simple handwriting, steady, familiar. "Lorraine, if this ever reaches you, I want you to know, your table helped me remember who I was. Thank you for giving us a place to land. Love, Ruthie." My breath caught. Ruthie. We hadn't spoken since the letter she sent months ago, the one that began everything. I held the paper to my chest. Outside, the wind rustled brittle leaves against the door. The girl looked up again. "She said to tell you the lemon pie lady still sings at church," she whispered. I laughed. A quiet, full laugh. The kind that shakes a memory loose. "Would you like to come in?" I asked. She nodded. Stepped over the threshold without hesitation. Her boots made little sounds on the wood, but her presence filled the space like light. I guided her to the table. She sat without waiting for instruction, picked up a scrap of blue gingham, ran her fingers across the frayed edge like it spoke to her. She said you could teach me the beginning stitch. I smiled, unspooled a length of thread, ran it gently through the eye of a waiting needle. "Let's start where all things start," I said. "In the fold. Right where the fabric remembers how to be held." She came every Thursday after that. Sometimes she brought fabric scraps tied with yarn, sometimes a question folded in a candy wrapper. Sometimes just her presence. Quiet, deliberate, like someone showing up for more than herself. We didn't always speak, but she always stitched. Her hands were small, unsure, but her thread was steady. She pulled it like it meant something, and it did. Other girls came too, one by one, drawn not by signs or flyers, but by whispers and warmth. Some came with their mothers, who stayed in the doorway like memories unsure of being invited back. Others came alone, carrying tote bags filled with old jeans, broken zippers, and stories they hadn't yet told themselves. None of them asked who Ruthie was. None of them needed to. They didn't know the names stitched into the corners of old quilts. But they knew the room was different. They knew the chairs would not ask them to explain, that the tea would be warm, the scissors sharp, the silence full, and that the cloth, always the cloth, would welcome their hands. One Thursday, the light came in softer than usual. The windows steamed gently from the morning boil. I looked up from my square, watched 3 young girls sit side by side. And not speaking, not posing, just stitching. One fixed a fray, one pressed seams. The youngest made knots that didn't hold. But she tried again, and that, I realized, was the lesson. Not perfection, not speed. Just the grace to begin again. Thread by thread, breath by breath. Not taught, just witnessed. They didn't come for me anymore. They came for the table. For what it allowed. A place to be whole, even while unraveling. And maybe that's what legacy really is, not what you leave behind, but what keeps welcoming others forward long after you stop explaining why. Has a table like this ever saved you too? We'd love to hear your story in the comments. You're not alone.